Molo Sanbonani, hello, how's it? Good evening. Goeienaand, Mensa, and Shalom. Welcome to another episode of Liberty and Friends here on the Big Daddy Liberty Show. Don't mind that erroneous intro that I used. It's not a vlog. It is Liberty and Friends, which means it is Sunday at 8 p.m. Welcome to it. My name is Usihle Ngobese, aka Big Daddy Liberty. And as always on Liberty and Friends, I don't come alone. I'm with the Friends panel. Now, before we get to the Friends panel, let me just quickly welcome you to what is the 50th edition of Liberty and Friends. Feels like a bit of a milestone, that the 50th, pardon me, edition of Liberty and Friends. As always on Liberty and Friends, it is a completely interactive show, so you are very much a part of the show, so make sure your comments roll in thick and fast. I'm hoping my sound levels are absolutely pashash and on point, and I know if they aren't, the comment section will be a buzz soon enough with messages to the contrary. With that being said, a quick reminder, please. Your only price of admission here on Liberty and Friends is for you to hit that like button. Do it now. Help save a seal in Antarctica by hitting that like button. Of course, that does nothing for seals in Antarctica, but it's always worth finding a new way to incentivize you to hit that like button. And please share the stream at the end of the show. Liberty and Friends, of course, is the one long format show that I have. So buckle up. It's going to be 90 minutes at least here. And you are very much a part of the show. Welcome to it. This is Liberty and Friends. Speaking about the Friends, as always, this show has a panel, a revolving door, if you will, of friends, people who hold ideas that are, broadly speaking, on a center-right, centrist, conservative, libertarian, anarchist persuasion, the very sort of ideas that you do not hear and the very sort of analysis that you don't hear in our corporate media. We bring you that analysis, very compelling in its nature, that you will not hear anywhere else. Speaking about the Friends panel, let me start bringing them on thick and fast. He is the host, one part of a trio at the ManPatria podcast. ManPatria, of course, you can find them on your social media. YouTube show every Monday at 7 p.m. I'm talking, of course, about Koketso Resane. Koketso, good evening.
Good evening. It feels like I haven't been here in forever, but good to be back on number 50 actually. So yeah, shout out to everyone watching and keeping the show going all the way to 50 and beyond.
Absolutely. Welcome to it. Koketso, of course, as I mentioned, is part of the trio over at ManPatria. Another part of that three-legged poiky pot, if you will, is Nzuzo Khati. There he is on screen. Nzuzo, good evening.
Good evening, Sihle. Good evening to the viewers. Great to be on the 50th episode of Big Daddy, Liberty and Friends, rather. And yeah, man, let's have a great show.
Absolutely, Putti. Good to have you. Been a while. Very, very good to see you on the show. Another familiar face, someone who proved very popular last time he was on the show. He made his debut on that particular instance, a business analyst out in Pretoria, Utanda. There he is on screen. There he is. That's right. Thanda Baba. Good evening. And he's muted. Thanda, just hit that unmute button, Baba.
Good evening to everybody. Happy to be here. Hope to be able to contribute to this, to these topics that we're going to be discussing today, and also good evening to all the panelists.
Absolutely. Good evening to you, Putwami. Very nice to have you. Another face who we have not seen for quite a while on the show. He is someone who we definitely look to when we discuss a very particular issue, which we'll traverse tonight on Liberty and Friends, and that is the issue of the Western Cape. It's yearning, if you will, a growing surge now of individuals in that part of the world who are saying, hey, maybe a Western Cape that goes it alone would not be a bad idea. I'm talking, of course, about Uprak Phil Craig. There he is on screen. Phil, Baba, good evening.
Thanks, Ishle. Great to be with you and with the rest of the panel, and looking forward to an enjoyable evening.
Absolutely, and very nice to have you on. I see he is in the waiting panel. Another face who we haven't seen in a while. Last time he was a bit ill, but Refuah Shlema, I hope he's back and he's feeling like Iman, as we say in Zulu. I'm talking, of course, about Rob Duigan from Afriforum. Rob, Baba, good evening.
Hi there. I hope the sound quality is okay. My usual mic has decided to not work, so...
No, we can hear you perfectly well, my brother. Guys,
good.
let's
Okay,
hop
cool.
straight into the conversation because I must just say this ahead of time. Some of our guests will have to skedaddle in an hour, but we have them for a full-on hour, so let's make use of that hour. Guys, I'm going to begin at the top. Today, the 1st of May, May Day, the communist holiday that is dubbed Workers' Day in this country, as if that removes the communist tinge. It's still very red in tooth and claw. Speaking about it being red in tooth and claw, workers today, the few that are in this country, saw red as they were being addressed by the president of the ANC, one Cyril Ramaphosa, in the Northwest. That scenes out of there, that is the Royal Bafokeng Stadium, where COSATU, that is the Congress of South African Trade Unions, was holding their May Day rally. Or I don't know if I can call it a rally anymore. A fire inspector could have gone to that event and be like, yeah, this is fine. It really didn't have the sort of numbers that would justify a rally to be said. But scenes in that part of the world descended into chaos when workers from a nearby mine, that's the Harmony Stillwater mine, basically expressed their discontent at this particular event. And eventually the president was escorted, whisked out of there by his security. Before I go to the panel, let me just play a very quick clip of that. And so we can have a sense of how, the president of the country, a former unionist himself, in fact, he cuts his political teeth in the union. Ironically, the National Union of Mine Workers was heckled out by the very people who belonged to the union that he was part of founding. Have a look at these scenes.
Mandla Armamalane Masule Kapuluwena Lulukwile. We've heard you. You want Rukwile. Rukwile. Okay. Lulukwile. Sinvile. Okay. Okay, that's fine. Koluki. Okay, Mamelange. Okay, Koluki. Listen there. Mamela. Members of COSATU. Members of AMKU. Mamelang. You want your 1,000 rand. You want your 1,000 rand. I understand that. You want the employers to give you your 1,000 rand. We've heard that message, and we will be dealing with that matter. Amandla. Viva COSATU, viva! Viva AMKU, viva! Viva COSATU, viva! Viva NUM, viva! Amandla! Ralebucha, Sinvile.
It should tell you everything you need to know when a former unionist president who now leads the party that is at the helm of those particular trade unions, is told by the very membership, you must go. Chants of that over and over and over. Rob, I must come to you because again, it speaks to a descending into chaos situation that not only the ANC finds itself in, but its tripartite alliance partners too.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a slow burning crisis of legitimacy. I mean, you notice that he had to address a portion of the crowd as Umku. He had to address an Umku, and so the Royal Bafokeng Stadium is sponsored and named after the local tribe who gets priority in hiring in the local platinum mines because it's in a former Bantustan, a current sort of what you call it, a traditionally governed area, and so there's a single point of access for rights to the area, and so the way that they've sort of triangulated mining rights in the area is by getting the Royal House of Bafokeng involved in the BEE structures. And then in return they make sure that the union that is controlled by Ramaphosa, which is of course controlled by by sort of very, very closely tied to the Oppenheimer family, MUN, then sort of maintains this delicate balance between the local tribe and the party and the unions and the platinum mines. And this all came to a head in Marikana back 10 years ago. Give or take a few months. And it was UMCU that was formed in order to break the deadlock created by the ANC-tied unions. And so they did what the only way that people know how to get heard in this country, which is through violence. And they started attacking security guards and MUN shop stewards and things like that. And I think they killed several people, including I think one or two policemen, if I remember correctly. It's been years since I read up on this, so if you'll excuse the numbers being a little off. And then the protest came to a head with the police taking revenge on them by killing 17 with machine gun fire and executing a further 17 at point blank range. And because of Ramaphosa's involvement in this particular neo-patrimonial structure, this sort of cobbled together illicit arrangement between the various sectors, he's been held guilty. He's been held liable for this incident for years by many sectors of the economy, and he's seen as having too close ties to the permanent oligarchs in this country. Rupert, Oppenheimer, Rothschild, and so on. I think the fact that he can't even get respect from loyal members like Kasatu means that his faction is in deep trouble coming up to the leadership election.
Absolutely. And again, I think, it's voices like that, Koketso, which begin to ring the warning bells for any politician who has built his brand of a populist stance. And it must be said, if you really look at it, Ramaphosa, if you look at his history, you could argue was that populist leader. He literally rose out of the National Union of Mine Workers. You're seen as this expert negotiator in this particular instance. Here he is, nearly 3 decades later, addressing those same workers, and now he's the president of a party that has led this country into an unemployment mess. That's what I want you to speak to in this particular context. And as Robert was rightly bringing up, there's still that tinge, if you will, of that blight on him of having been responsible. Whether you agree with that statement or not is not what I'm prosecuting here, but it is what was cast on him politically as being responsible for Imarikana. That guy, the one who leads the unemployment charge in this country, addressing workers, it's a really cynical thing on a workers' day, isn't it?
Yeah, I think firstly, Ramaphosa and his people, his office, etc., I think they grossly underestimated his popularity, particularly in that part of the country. Given that, depending on who you are, Marikana can still end up being something very fresh in your mind. So I think, yeah, going out there, particularly on a workers' day, was probably not the best idea. Over and above that, we have to consider that workers there, miners particularly, those employed by Sibanye Stillwater, they're actually striking for a 1,000 Rand increase. The negotiation between unions and the employer this time around have been going on for well over 8 months, I believe. So yeah, if you're the average worker there, you're faced with two issues. The first being that your union's actually been negotiating with your employer unsuccessfully for 8 months, and still, nothing has been actually signed to be concrete yet. And then secondly, like you mentioned with the unemployment crisis, you have to factor in that for a lot of the people there, they've got friends who are no longer working because of the terrible business conditions for mining as a whole. So, if you're there and the president is there, who's the same guy you may find at least partly responsible for Marikana decades ago, yeah, you don't want to see him. And then over and above that, he's promising to address a situation that your own union hasn't been able to handle. So, yeah, I think it wasn't a good idea to go there as Ramaphosa. And yeah, using the veil of Workers' Day and perhaps him being at the head of the table in the tripartite alliance between ANC and the unions, maybe could have you could argue say that that's what actually qualifies him to be the best person to speak there. But there's too many problems. It's too much of a hot potato. And given the unemployment crisis right now and worker demands with the union and the employer, he shouldn't have gone out there in the first place. And this will be a harsh lesson for his office to learn going forward.
Absolutely. Thanda, I must come to you, and I'm a little rushed because I need to plug in my laptop here. Workers' Day, our unemployment level, there's something really cynical about that combo, isn't there? Where so many young people, as many as 60, nearly 70% of young people are unemployed in this country.
Sorry. Okay, can you hear me? Basically, what we've seen in South Africa over the last years is government has been working with unions to, in essence, improve the conditions of people who work. Basic Conditions of Employment Act, various other acts that have been put into place. Recently, there was the minimum wage that was put in. So they've done a lot of things to improve the conditions of people who work. The issue is that as they've done that, the number of people who work has been decreasing, both as a number and also as a proportion. So we're sitting now with a situation where we have an extremely high unemployment rate. And obviously, this is caused by so many factors that a person cannot really put their finger and say it's just one thing. Some people say it's regulation. Some people say it's something else. But when you look at mining as an example, South Africa, has been a mining country since the 1800s. We have not managed to graduate to a place where we start beneficiating some of the things that we manufacture. So at the end of the day, all that's happening is we are still at the primary sector. We haven't managed to take this any further. So we haven't been able to expand employment within what is our strengths. Our strength is mining. It's gonna be mining. We've got a lot of minerals. It's gonna be that for a while, but we haven't been able to really expand on that. And that's of course because unions have no incentive to. For a union, so long as it's getting money from its members and perhaps kickbacks from some of the employers, everything's good for them, and they've got no other reason to actually improve anything. So it requires, I believe, action from or thought, greater thought from other sectors of the country to kind of look at how we can expand employment. I took a drive in the long weekend that went by, the Easter weekend, and I went through Mpumalanga area, Devon and a few of the areas around there. And a lot of these places are already teetering into ghost towns. They are hanging by a thread just by these these particular jobs that are around there. There's been no expansion. There's been no improvement. There's no vision. We're a country really that is without direction, and I think that is really the major problem of why we're seeing an unrelenting slide towards greater unemployment.
The funny thing, even as you say that, there's one thing I wanted to add to that, is that actually South Africa did have a rather robust manufacturing base in this country. We had a recent episode about this with economist Mike Schussler and Upegi Makhobo from the Center for Risk Analysis, where they gave us that shocking stat that South Africa's manufacturing base in this country has been so decimated, so destroyed by ANC policy, that we have the same number of employees in manufacturing now as we did back in 1960. That is how much destruction has literally happened in this country. If we have a look at that graph they shared, and I did share it on the screen, it literally has an upward trajectory, and really as the ANC comes into power, begins to precipitously drop and decline effectively, speaking to again that notion, Nzuzo, as I bring you in, that bad policy has consequences. I mean, we're kind of skirting around the issue here, but in real terms, bad policy has led to a situation where Workers' Day is seen with a rather cynical view in this country, as actually, if anything, it's not Workers' Day, it's Unemployed Persons Day, if anything. But bad policy is at the heart of it. The ideology of our politicians is at the heart of it.
Yeah, Sipo, Sikle, sorry for that. Yeah, I really agree with what you say, and just going back to the very video that we actually saw that you just posted up. I don't think any of those employees were actually worried about the fact that many employees or many people are unemployed. In South Africa, I think that for them it was just about their 1,000 rand, and it just talks to the elitism that the ANC policy has created. You have this group of employees that which is AMKU, and as well as a COSATU, fighting for a 1,000 rand increase after having gotten so many other increases before that, and essentially really pushing out the unemployed and the unskilled out of the labor market, and therefore creating the problem that we have today. But that's also coupled by the policies that the ANC has also implemented, such as the minimum wage, such as the bargaining council, which comprises of, as Rob says, the elitist groups, the unions, the government, as well as big business. And that's all that is actually encompassing of that bargaining council, as well as NEDLAC, if I'm not mistaken. And those are the people that essentially make the final decision regarding labor policy in South Africa. And no one else can actually get an input into that. And that's the issue that we find ourselves in. We find ourselves having to be at the mercy of these three groups when it comes to labor market. And we cry every single month, or rather every single quarter, when we see the unemployment numbers going up. But it's because of the policies and the very groups that are created by way of these policies, which is the NEDLACs of this world, that we can't actually, you can only say so much, about about the issues that plague this country. You can only say youth unemployment is 7%, but if the people on the other side don't want to listen and don't care, as you saw in that very image or that very video that you posted, they don't really care about the unemployment rate. They care about their 1,000 rand. And the more they get their demands met, these unions, the more they take out many of the South African, the rest of the unemployed in South Africa. And that's the issue that we need to really deal with, is that we need to break this elitist group. We need to push back people who are unemployed and been unemployed for 5 to 10 years. I've constantly talking about people I know that have been unemployed for more than 5 years, my age, people that are more unemployed for more than 5 years, even after graduating, and yet no answers actually being given, and no solutions ultimately. And these policies are really at the heart of it. But I think I also see it's the people that are at the heart of it. Who's incentivized by these policies? The ANC, is the unions, and it's big business. If they can continuously create the situation, and we take from what Moleti Mbeki also said, is that you just replace the new South Africa was just a replacement of what was previously in apartheid. It wasn't like some sort of breakaway from the policies or the attitude of government as compared to apartheid. It was the same attitude, same mentality, and we find ourselves in the same situation which you essentially had in apartheid, which is majority of the people are ostracized from the labor market and from actually creating wealth, while you have a small minority dictating to everyone else what happens.
And again, I think you've just hit the nail on the head insofar as the one of the key problems we're facing here is that we're being governed by people who really are and Rob used the word, an oligarchy in a sense, and you rightly outlined as to who is involved in that, Nzuzo, by mentioning, for example, NEDLAC in the most direct sense, and of course the bargaining councils. It seems the market in this country is it's not actually the market. It's decisions around who you employ, why you employ them, how you employ them, the number of people you employ, what is forced on you to employ people based on race. All of these decisions are made by politicians, political elites, big corporates, and really union bosses. It's very, very seldom that the individual, really the entrepreneur, makes decisions about their own business. I saw a comment by Vernon Niger in the comment section, and I didn't flight it. It was just zoomed by too quickly, saying basically kudos to anybody who's still an entrepreneur in South Africa, because the market really, and what you're facing from load shedding, the state, bad policy, just really makes it an insurmountable problem. Craig, again, that problem that you're very familiar with of centralized planning, individuals at the top who think they can make decisions, a one-size-fits-all decision, it's crippling the country.
Sure. Look, I think, yeah, and I've always felt this, and I wouldn't want to be misunderstood, but the issue in the South African economy is transformation, and actually that's not that the South African economy shouldn't be transformed, but we're faced with the ideology against the pragmatism, and we either look outwards at growing the economy and recognizing that through growth we'll transform the economy by creating a bigger economy, a more inclusive economy, or we're going to constantly look inwards and try and manage every possible aspect of that to engineer an outcome. And so fundamentally that's what destroyed our economy, and that's what is destroying our company now with the more the policies fail, the more the government just tries to engineer the outcome even more and more and more. And for me, as a absolute pragmatist, I find it really frustrating. I absolutely want to see the economy transformed, but particularly I have to look at the stats, and I haven't got them to hand here, but there's something like 150,000 unemployed white people. So you have this government who's almost totally obsessed with trying to keep whites out of the labour market. Whereas if they create 5 million jobs, they haven't even got to consider the aspects of race, because if they create 5 million jobs, you'll automatically have a transformative effect. And I think that is the real critical thing. We just keep doubling down and doubling down and doubling down on bad policy, whereas actually if we just can open up the economy, move forward, then we know that we can address these things. It's not rocket science, and that's the real frustration. It's the fundamentals, and we sit here, we all know it's wrong, but the bottom line is we carry on with it, and then actually we wonder why, oh my goodness, it's got worse, it's got worse, it's got worse. We all know it's got worse, we all know it's going to keep on getting worse. Until such times as we address those fundamental issues, it's going to get worse. How we do that is difficult, because it isn't the government that ultimately is responsible. It's the electorate, because the biggest issue with South Africa is not the ANC government. It's the electorate that keeps appointing them, regardless of how bad they are. And how I address that, I don't know. And ultimately, that's where we get to our issue of Cape independence. And say, well, look, that's the part that seems unsurmountable. In a normal functioning country, when you have a government that's this bad, it gets removed. And it's almost beyond contemplation that you just keep on re-electing it. The electorate keeps on re-electing it, regardless of how badly it does, regardless of what commissions we have, how dishonest they are. It's just inconceivable. And how do you fix that? And the answer is, until South Africa takes a really long, hard look at itself, you can't. Which is why we want to leave. But that's the reality of the situation. It's an unfortunate reality, but that's the reality we're sitting with. It can be fixed. We all know exactly what has to be done. We're just not willing to do it.
And we'll get to that in a moment. We've just hit that 30-minute mark here on Liberty and Friends. Remember, all you need to do as you are trickling through, the numbers are looking relatively strong. I know they're going to get much stronger if you hit that like button. Do it right now. Hit that like button and forget the seals in Antarctica. A polar bear will have a meal tonight if you hit that like button. That's still not true, but what is true is you please hitting that like button, growing the show. Welcome to it. We are in conversation with the fellas from ManPatria. That's of course Koketso, Resane, and Nzuzo Khati. There they are right next to me on screen. Also joined by Utanda Mabaso, independent business analyst out in Pretoria. Shout out to him, man, for joining us tonight. Phil Craig, the head honcho over at Cape Independence Advocacy Group. Oh, we're about to unpack that issue with him a little later tonight as we look at the march that the Cape Independence Lobby Group, in its broad sense, had in Cape Town. And of course, Rob Duigan, there he is, Umar Robane himself from Afriforum at the bottom of the screen. Welcome to it. This is Liberty and Friends. Guys, as we maybe segue to the next topic, I just want to linger with this one for a brief moment, for just a minute or two, by also bringing in some of the comments here. And I first want to say shout out to you, Deborah Olivier, for the very generous 350 Rand super chat. Super thank you for that. And she's showing love to you guys, saying she loves the guest tonight. Again, thank you very much, Deborah. Andre coming through here says, hey man, policies don't create jobs, competition creates jobs. We don't have competition in this country. Instead, we have over-regulation. That central problem of politicians, the political leads, and corporates being the loudest voice, and not entrepreneurs, and not the market, most importantly, being raised by Andre there. One more comment here by Usam Monkwe, saying, I don't think people understand what a low unemployment rate effectively means. For instance, less people available to work means employers are going to pay to keep you, because without you, the business dies. I may have misread that, Sam, but I think I get your point. Guys, and this is an open question to everybody here as I wrap up this section. For me, my biggest concern is really this one: the instability that comes from as Ufil rightly pointed out, an ongoing situation of certain people voting in for a certain party over and over, regardless of its track record. The instability that stems from that is one which we're beginning to see in this country flare up in a very violent kind of way, where actually we need to burst a few myths. It is not the majority of South Africans who are voting for the ANC at all. In fact, there are more people in this country who are eligible to vote, but who do not vote. Now, for whatever reason, I'm not prosecuting that for now. For me, it's just to burst that myth that, most people in South Africa are ANC voters. Actually, correction. Most people who vote in this country may be ANC voters, but there's a large number of people, 15 million plus. And if you compare that to the 11 million the ANC got, it tells you a story, Rob, as to how perhaps, politically speaking, one of the things we need to be injecting into our politics are alternatives that maybe bring out that 15 million who maybe look at the current landscape and go, no one here represents me. Maybe there isn't something which is perhaps center-right or nationalist in nature or libertarian or whatever the case may be, but no one clearly represents me. How do we bring those people out, Rob? Because they perhaps will make or break Project South Africa.
Well, I mean, it's very difficult. I think, look, personally, I don't like Project South Africa.
I'll set you up.
I mean, yeah, I mean, the thing is, I've been against South Africa from both sides of the fence. I was a sort of Rhodes Must Fall communist type, and now I'm work for Afriforum. So from both sides of the fence, I've got my criticisms. But I think the thing is that the only way you can really answer this is, and I think Nzuzo mentioned this briefly, but there's a lot of depth under this remark that he made, that there's a continuation of the system. I mean, if you read a lot of Black consciousness thinkers, and I think probably the most articulate one, the one that sort of has represented this particular political philosophy the most cogently, would be Ndumiso Dladla. Now, of course, I disagree with him on a lot of things, but he's the best representative, I think, of the movement. And the way he sort of describes South Africa in its current sort of democratic state, he says, well, it's not an African country, and it's a continuation of the colonial system. And in a sense, he's right. It's that, we're still using a Western legal system. We have a Western constitution, And the sort of, how should I put it, the indigenous political culture is not really represented under this system. But at the same time, it's also the indigenous political culture of the majority is not the political culture of everyone. And in the Western Cape, the majority of people, white and colored, are not. We don't have that same sort of basic cultural set of cultural instincts. And I think that the best way to represent either of these groups is to have the country sort of divorce. And it's at a very, very profound level, I think that that's true. So, I mean, I don't know, race aside, I think there's plenty of, we know that there's plenty of white people who are happy to integrate into the deeper, sort of Black African cultures. One guy, I don't know if you've had him on yet, but I'd look forward to seeing if you have. I'm probably going to Google it when I'm done here. There's a fellow called Gigi Alcock, who's one of our best economic minds, who grew up as a white Zulu. So it's not like the boundaries can't be crossed, and there's a significant minority of Black people in the Cape who've also sort of parted with some of the deeper Bantu cultures as well. And you can even see it in the way that we engage with the political economy. There's a group who's part of the Cape secessionist movement called the Langeberg Unemployment Forum, which is a majority Black movement, which aims to strip away all of the rather noxious labor protections that we've got in order to allow people the opportunity to work. So there's a very, very different culture on all sides. And I think that most of the questions, if you really want to solve the problems, you have to give people a dispensation where there's enough of a consensus on. It's actually a very, very old idea from the Roman Republic. The idea of what makes a republic, what makes it actually function, is you need consensus amongst the people on a sense of justice and a sense of common interests. And the problem is that in South Africa, at a very, very profound level, not just at like a superficial ideological level, people differ on a very, very, very deep cultural level. And I think I think we need an outlet for that. And there's a lot of decentralization and partition that needs to be done sort of governmentally for people to be able to express themselves properly. And as they say, to get people on board with the more sensible economic policies that you're on, more people need to be doing what you're doing, which is, in the words of the left, is conscientizing the people.
No, but guys, anybody can hop in here, because this will be the last bite of this particular apple before we move on. And maybe let me just drop one quick grenade in here that I'm hoping one of you will grapple with. And no, you don't have to throw yourself on it and take the blast for everybody. But for me, I must come back to this point. And as Rob brings up an important point, it's the unemployed in this country don't actually have a voice. The only time we really see them is when they get angry enough at being excluded from society, and they resort to behavior which we then find our voices as the chattering class and go, we almost turn our noses up at them and go, look at those poor people. Tut tut, how dare they loot and pillage and destroy things and blah blah blah. And funny enough, we'll get into that in a moment, albeit from a different perspective. But I'm talking exclusively here about the unemployed, the very people who find themselves on the margins. And look at it from their perspective. Maybe they didn't even vote for the ANC, for example. They'd find themselves being victims of the sort of leftist dogma in this country that makes it almost impossible, indeed makes them unemployable. What does that person do? Do they form civil society organizations, guys, and begin to push back, fight back, and get their voice out there, guys? Like, surely there must be a stopgap here that gets us into that next phase of our politics. Anybody can chime in here.
I think. Oh, sorry. Maybe if I just say this. I think the issue is that the majority of South Africans don't know. I think the majority of South Africans don't know what actually will change things in the country. We sit here and we say we've got the answers. We know that it's the policies and it's this particular regulation and that regulation that's causing a problem. But that isn't common knowledge amongst the majority of the population. So that's why when they are not happy with the ANC, they just stop voting. Because they know that the ANC is not delivering for them, but they don't know exactly why it's not delivering. So as a result, they don't know which other alternative they must then turn to. They don't know if the EFF's ideas is what will work. They don't know if it's the DA's or if it's this party or that party's ideas. They don't really know whose idea of how an economy should run is going to work for them, and that's why they just stop voting. And I think that ultimately is the problem that we have, is that people are sitting in a situation where they don't have enough education about how an economy works to be able to make a determination that the reason the ANC is failing is because of A, B, C, and D. And because they can't make that, they can't then compare the ANC to some other party and say, well, this other party has A, B, C, and D, they will be able to do a better job. So that's why they just refrain. And maybe that's why a country like China decides, okay, we're just going to control everything centrally, probably more competently than the ANC has done. And we're just going to make the decisions, because maybe people at a certain level wouldn't be able to know for themselves what actually is going to make things better.
Yes, guys, I think Utanda gave me a nice little segue to the next topic, insofar as the notion of political illiteracy, because it may be at the very heart of this next issue that we saw flare up in the most horrific way this week. And that's out, of course, in Kirkwood in the Eastern Cape, a very rural part of the Eastern Cape. They're just outside Port Elizabeth. And yes, I said Port Elizabeth near Addo. In that part of the world, it has descended into absolute mayhem, chaos, and a wanton disregard for property rights and even life in that part of the world. But don't take it from me. Let me flight some images of what farmers in that part of the world, and even farm workers, those who aren't protesting, have been dealing with in that part of the world. This is, of course, I'll play this first clip of a resident of Kirkwood. Apologies, the translation might not go flight on screen because it's in Afrikaans, but I'll try to actually give a little synopsis of what this particular resident out in Kirkwood is reporting is happening in that part of the world. And SAPs, as she puts it, are completely overwhelmed, having run out of even ammunition.
Hallo julle, ons boere van Kirkwood, Sandens en Addo area het baie dringend hulle gebeure nodig. Ek weet nie of julle die nuus dophou nie. Alles wat ons gesê word is waar. Hulle probeer letterlik alles afbrand. Hulle is besig om wraak te neem. Hulle het gevra vir R30 'n uur meer vir lone. Per uur wil hulle R30 meer hê en die boere het net gesê nee, hulle kan nie. Met alles wat in die ekonomie aangaan, dit is net regtig 'n onmoontlike taak. Aan die begin het hulle net sekere boere getarget en hulle goed aan die brand gesteek. Nou steek hulle letterlik enige iets aan die brand. Hulle het miljoene rand al afgebrand. Hulle brand store, kratte met suurlemoene in, huise, boorde, hulle brand alles, trekkers, trokke, excavators, hulle brand alles uit. Hulle is nou so arrogant, hulle draai jou huis leeg en dan steek hulle hom aan die brand. Hulle maak petrolbomme. En het gisteraand probeer om die brandweerstasie te petrolbom, wat slim is. Ek weet nie, het hulle dit eers reg gekry nie, so baie dinge om my aan die gang. Ons het ekstra mense wat ons probeer oppas, maar hulle kom 1000 op 'n slag by jou plaas aan. Ja, so dis chaos om ons en ons het regtig julle gebeure nodig. Ons het julle hulp nodig. Die polisie het uit ammunisie uitgehardloop. Daar is elke sekuriteitskompanie is al deploy. Ons is net nie genoeg teen hulle nie. Ons het regtig julle hulp nodig. As julle weet van enige iemand wat kan kom help en op enige manier asseblief, jy weet, sê dit in my comments. Ek kan julle die nommers gee wat julle moet bel vir die hoofmense om mee te praat. Ja, dis scary as jy kinders het en jy moet hulle beskerm en al die dinge gaan aan. En dit wat die ergste is jy werk jare letterlik jare om al jou goed op te bou en hulle petrolbom het in 5 minute af op die grond. So ja, daar's mense wat al so baie skade het, julle mense wat letterlik met hulle klere in hulle lyf by hulle huis weg is. Ek dink die nuus maak dit nie eers so erg soos dit regtig is nie. Die foto's is nie 'n fraksie.
And I think she's, firstly, insofar as what she's saying, and I'll condense it. She describes absolute mayhem, absolute chaos in the parts of the world where nearly anything and everything that these protesters, these thugs, these riotous monsters are setting anything and everything alight, even quite cynically, in terms of burning people's homes, looting and raiding them, and then setting them alight, burning warehouses where of that produce that has been picked already is usually placed. They're burning those, they're burning fields, they're burning tractors, excavators, trucks. And again, don't take it from me. I've got images of what exactly she is talking about. There are fields in that part of the world which are being set alight. This particular case is a warehouse and a house that was set alight on that particular in Kirkwood, pardon me. This next image, again, a flyover, as you can see, the sort of feet of a pilot there. A warehouse where often, once the fruits are picked, there's often these cold rooms, or warehouses where it's temporarily kept before it's trucked off to the market. A farmhouse here, someone's home set alight. I believe this particular farmhouse happened to be of farm workers. Again, a wanton disregard for people's property rights, simply set alight by these callous individuals. A farmer's house in this particular image, as you can see, the ruins of it. And again, people need to understand, this is someone's home. This is someone's home. Someone lived here. Someone called the space home. Their kids play here. They've lost all sense of things. Infrastructure, farming infrastructure, by way of trucks, as you can see, being burnt down. And I'll just play one more, or rather actually show you one more image. This is a particular farm in the area, which you can see from an overview, and I think there's still some protesters. And again, I shouldn't call them rioters. They're rioters. As you can see, sort of running between the various homes there, with a wanton disregard for people's property rights. That's happening right now, or that has been happening, pardon me, for the past week in Kirkwood. And you now have a situation where the police in that part of the world simply cannot handle what is happening there. And again, kudos to the police, kudos to the private security who've been trying to hold it down. Let me just bring the friends back on screen here, because I do think we need to chat about this, guys, insofar as this is not an isolated incident. Right now, it's flaring up in this particular part of the world. But, we spoke earlier on of what happens when those who are economically illiterate seem to think they can demand their way into something. And when they don't get that demand, then resort to violence. And then almost, well, if you can't have it, no one can have it attitude. It's absolutely toxic, Koketso.
Yeah, it is. And I'd like to give people's parents the benefit of the doubt that I believe no one was raised with values instilled in them that if you don't get your way, you need to find a match and basically, torch something to get the attentions of the higher ups, for example. But maybe if I can say this, I think much of this comes down to the whole principle of the zero-sum game, that someone is poor because someone else is rich, that the reason you may not have is because someone out there has. And therefore, the only way to equalize it is to either A, you bring up the people who are the have-nots, or B, you drag down those who have. And a very quick way to drag those down, particularly if you're taking this into your own hands, is to set something alight and do permanent damage by way of fire or water, of course. So until we've actually somehow removed that sort of thinking from the citizenry, if I can put it like that, then we are going to see a repeat situation of this. And what really does guarantee that things like this will continue to happen is that if you look at the criminal justice system as well, after the fact, when the smoke has disappeared, when there's nothing left but ruins, once the earth has been scorched, you don't see people being prosecuted. Well, yeah, maybe you do in rare instances, but there isn't a culture of people being prosecuted for crimes such as this. And I'll again reference the July riots last year. How many people have actually been prosecuted over those? So people who do this, they really do face no consequences, and this becomes, it's not effective for them to really change their economic circumstance, but at the very least it does somewhat quench a temporary thirst for vengeance, and in the end that achieves nothing and actually makes the situation worse. The significance of a farm is that you may not like the owner, but you and I still have to rely on that farm. We still have to rely on that land's produce. So if you get rid of it, by torching it, you've not just gotten rid of this season or next season's harvest, but you actually discourage even the next person from putting in the necessary work and plowing and tilling the land for future benefit of themselves and even yourselves as an end consumer at the end of the day. This requires the kind of long-term thinking that those who are looking for a temporary reprieve or something to satiate their temporary vengeance, they don't think about things to that long-term of an effect. And unfortunately, until we have some adequate policing at the very least to protect private property, then every time someone feels aggrieved by whatever system they want to point fingers at, this will always be a viable option, particularly for those who are looking to commit arson and the like. And maybe as a last point, it seems everyone has quite forgotten, media and non-media, that the Parliament building was razed to the ground, or almost to the ground, earlier this year. We haven't heard much. There has been very little follow-up from the media. Even the National Assembly hasn't been mentioning it much, as they're all settling comfortably in an alternative location back in Cape Town. So, yeah, when things like this happen, arson and the like, people quickly forget. And it's sad to see, but those who are on the receiving end of losing their property, their valuables, and again, in dire circumstances, their loved ones, due to violent attack, they're quickly forgotten, and we need to change that as a nation. I don't know where we begin, but this needs to change, and I hope it does in my lifetime at least.
What upsets me here, fellas, and I want to throw this to everybody. I'm an aspirant farmer. I've taken over a long-held family plot here in just north of Durban, near Stanger. The kind of work that I'm looking to put into, or pardon me, the kind of work that's gone into it right now, let's begin there, before the real stuff starts, has been so taxing on me. It has been stressful. There have been times where you literally cry yourself to sleep sometimes because you think about the amount of blood, sweat, and toil you've thrown into that. Something as basic as a small example as erecting fencing, clearing bush, soil testing, checking for borehole, checking water sources, soil pH, you name it. All of these things that go into just the beginnings of a agribusiness and the costs that are associated with that, where you sink sometimes even your last few rands into this business in the hopes, in my case, that 5 years from now, I'll reap the benefits of my first harvest of macadamia nuts. 7 years from now, I'll reap the benefits of my first Haas avocados, because that's the two things that I'm looking to grow on the farm. For someone to come and raid your property, have their way basically on it, destroy everything, and you must sit there and watch them do this, is absolutely heartbreaking. And I don't think people understand how personally some people like us, small farmers as we are, even looking at our larger counterparts, many of whom, by the way, are our mentors. There are guys who mentor me, who are much more established, blah, blah, blah. It's painful to watch the livelihoods of effectively people get destroyed. Rob, let me come to you, and then Nzuzo, because there's two things I want you fellas to grapple with here. Rob, I made mention at the beginning of this week, or midway through this week, pardon me, on Twitter, that actually farming in this country, if you're going to survive, it can no longer be, and you can no longer be someone who prioritizes a labor-intensive approach to farming. That actually maybe us farmers need to go the approach of going into more debt to mechanize our farms to the best of our ability. That's what I'm going to be doing. For example, even with macadamias, even with avots, as little as possible, have labor on the farms, because labor really in this country has become an occupational hazard and even a deadly one. Rob?
I mean, that may be true, but there's only so much you can mechanize. And the thing is that a particular problem like Kirkwood, I mean, they're not only protesting for increases of wages amongst those who are already employed. They're protesting for more jobs for those employed yet. You know, particularly talking about the employment of foreigners. So it's that kind of thinking is going. You're not going to solve that with mechanization, because there's a hard ceiling to how much you can mechanize your agricultural economy. It's not feasible for most people, and I think particularly in most fields as well. I mean, you're talking about macadamia nuts. I mean, how much can you mechanize that? You know, the other thing is, I think the security on farms is going to remain a problem, and you know, as much as it is something that asymmetrically affects white farmers, black farmers also get very, very severely targeted by these problems. And, you know, even if you're not talking about sort of the targeted assassinations, something as simple as land invasions, which just you can't deal with. I mean, there's plenty of, if you go and look this up, there's plenty of black farmers who've been in the news where this has happened to them, where, you know, people come up, build shacks on this guy's land, and then start stealing his livestock, and the government will do nothing. You know, the question is, you know, at a certain point, you know, it no longer becomes profitable to farm, and for a lot of people, you know, people are grinding out on the edges, and so you're seeing a lot of consolidation into these big mega farms, and most of the legacy farmers. I mean, even here in Drakenstein municipality, you've got, I mean, this is where, you know, there's families who've been farming for 9-10 generations in the same plot of land. And, you know, then they'll just sort of give up and go over to a property developer or a mega boer who comes down and consolidates the land into a bigger thing, because these very, very large corporate entities can absorb the kinds of damage and risk that, you know, that South Africa is exposed to, but that small people can't. And I think that's an extreme tragedy, and there's no way to solve it overnight, and there's no way to solve it as an individual. It is a very, very serious long-term challenge, really.
You know, one of the things I always say, guys, and this is why I'm always cautious about these sort of things. The market always finds a way. The market always finds a way. When it comes to, for example, just to add some meat to this conundrum, when it comes to macadamia farming, there are actually machines that are able to do it. There's two types. The one literally goes down the aisle. You have to plant your trees in a certain way. It encapsulates itself around the stem. Sorry, I'm going to listen Zulu.
Oh, you're talking about that sort of palisade planting where you train it onto a...
And it effectively shakes the tree, and the nuts fall into a catchment. The other one, of course, is it has these arms that swing around and beat the tree, and the nuts fall off, and they're souped up by machines. This is what I keep saying to people, especially when it comes to capital investment in this country and the risk of labor. You're seeing this even happen in the retail space, where retailers are saying, to hell with having a massive labor component. We'll slowly begin to introduce even machines to begin to do the work of, let's say, tellers and whatever the case may be. But the point is, the market finds a way, and this is the risk, Nzuzo, that labor doesn't factor in sometimes when it engages in this adversarial union type relation between the worker and employees. It's a very sort of Marxist approach to labor relations, where they see that the employer as a part of an enemy class, as opposed to someone who they should be working with.
Yes, it's clear. I think also, the market made a decision when, it started corporatizing farming, they knew that, to consolidate farms and put it into a much more risk averse situation, that had to corporatize it. And you see that across the whole country, like Rob says, families that have been farming for generations will just give up their farms to a developer, and then after that, the developer takes it on, and they can absorb the cost and the damages that can come about as a result of land invasions. And I think that ultimately, but also, let me just say this. I'm not necessarily a person that always says the market will decide, because ultimately I think that, jobs are not just created for making money. They're created for improving the lives of people. And I think that it's ultimately, and especially for a community, you have a mom and pop store right down the road, not necessarily because it only provides goods, but at least it can employ many of the youngsters in the area, so they can also be able to, understand how a business is run. So I think that, always saying that the market, like I said, decided when it corporatized. And I understand when farmers say they have to obviously turn to machinery and use those type of methods to actually run a business. But ultimately, I think, as Rob said, it's difficult to machinize or use machines for farming. In my opinion, I think that ultimately, also another thing is that, you're also at the dictates of the economy and how the economy is going. So a lot of farmers have to take out debt, and you're dealing with with a business that's not necessarily like a normal business that you see in the CBD. It has its seasons, and when it's not the season for farming citrus, for example, you still have to make your payments, and ultimately those farms go down. So it's a difficult subject to really tackle. That's going to be something that's going to be dealt with by, obviously, Agri Union, if I'm not mistaken. It's not an overnight solution. You guys want to have to discuss it. But nonetheless, I think that, when we try to create jobs, we shouldn't try to say the market will tell. Yes, the market will obviously show solutions, but nonetheless, you still have people that you have to take care of. You might have people that are not necessarily that are unskilled, but nonetheless, they still need jobs, because you're going to be creating situations such as we have now. And just also going back to Kirkwood, I think that it's not only from, if I read when I did my research, it's not only people that want more wages. It's people that don't want immigrants. They want more police visibility within their areas, within their townships. They want more. They want government officers to come to their townships, and ultimately you have this so many moving parts, so many groups coming together, and you ultimately find that the people that actually just wanted the increase in wages are not even part of the violent crew. You could find that as people who could be an arm of maybe the EFF. It could also be people who are against immigrants, and you never know. So obviously it just builds up from one issue, and then after that, everyone seems like they want to join in on the party. But just to finish off, I think that isn't this a regular thing nonetheless? Because last time I heard is that there's a violent protest every single day in South Africa, and I think it's as a result of the fact that, when you hear stories of police running out of ammo, you will see an increase of more protests and more crime, because obviously people know that the cops are not going to come out and do anything. So I think that it's also as a result of that. But nonetheless, I think that this situation needs to be dealt with quite quickly before food production is affected across the country.
Thanda, I'm a little I don't know how to frame this question when it comes to you, in the sense of there's something fundamentally wrong, Thanda, about a country where we're willing to kill the very people who help us put bread on the table, quite in a quite literal sense. We're willing to destroy the equipment of those people who quite literally reap or buy a vuna, what's vuna in English? Harvest, who harvest the very food items that we need in this country, and do so often, by waking up as early as 3 in the morning and going to bed at 9 in the evening. It's those people, Tanda, who we're destroying in this country. I then asked the question, I want you to grapple with this. How do we then expect to replace what is very much an aging commercial farmer? The average commercial farmer in this country is 61. The last time I had a look at that stat, and it's getting older, by the way. How do we really expect to replace that that aging caliber of commercial farmers in this country, where I can tell you now, it's not a racial thing. For example, no young black farmer would want to enter commercial farming when they look at the situation themselves.
Yeah. I think I made a bit of a comment about this on Twitter on something that you had posted on this, to say, I think there is a big problem in terms of the PR or the image around farming. There's a particular stereotype. A person here and there might know a black or Indian friend of theirs who farms, but there's a general stereotype in the majority of South Africans that a farmer, if you say, what is a farmer? A farmer is a Boer. It's a white Afrikaner person who's racist. That's I'm putting it as simply as that. That is the view of what is makes up a farmer, the stereotypical
Especially by politicians, that's their view.
Yes. And so as a result of that, I think there's a lot of apathy around what happens on farms, what are the issues that farmers might or might not face, when their farmer is killed, it might even be a black farmer that got killed. Nobody even cares to know. It's just a farmer got killed and it's a farmer and we think it's this type of person. So I think on the one hand, you have that problem that there just isn't the right kind of PR around this type of job, which does two things. Obviously, it creates the apathy that I'm talking about, but then secondly, what it does is that are there a lot of bright black people who do well in school who think, what I'd like to put my talents to is to become a farmer? It doesn't happen. I don't believe it happens. That often most South Africans are living in urban areas. That's where most of the best education is. But we're not getting a lot of those people coming out of high school and thinking, I want to become a farmer. So I think there's a lot of PR that has to be done around that. There's going to be a lot that farmers maybe can do workshops in urban areas or something like that. Not coming only to us, to those of us in the urban areas, not only coming when they're coming to say people are killing us, but coming in just to give that idea and that understanding of this is what farming's about. These are the opportunities that there are in farming. These are some internships that you could do. These are, come up with all sorts of things like that really get people thinking about farming in a different light. That will, I think, allow a situation where politically, the government would then have to start looking at how to protect farmers because people actually care. Another thing about people caring is you spoke about farmers being the people who produce the food that ultimately comes on people's tables so that they can eat. What about that? I think the number I read was 40%, or maybe it's too high of a percentage. I can't remember, but there was a percentage of people who go hungry every day in South Africa. And so the fact that somebody is producing food that somebody eats, if I'm not eating it, what difference really does it make in my life? So that's where we come back to this issue of unemployment and what Rob said, where people feel very disconnected to South Africa. they're South Africa, but am I in it? Am I benefiting from this South Africa? Am I benefiting from this system? And if I don't benefit from this system, I'll have no respect for the system. I'll have no respect for its institutions. I'll have no respect for its infrastructure. There's a lot of things I'm not going to have respect for if I don't feel like I'm part of the system and that the system is actually working and benefiting me.
And maybe before I come to you, Phil, and before I open it up to everybody, and we will move on in a moment, guys. I'm just keeping an eye on time. We're in the last 20 minutes of Liberty and Friends. Welcome to it, guys. Please do me a favor. The audience numbers have been ticking up, but my likes have not been ticking up. Please hit that like button. Do it now. Phil, there's a conversation to be had here around perhaps the whole ecosystem around how we talk about agriculture generally, and how actually, contrary to what the politicians always push, agriculture for the vast majority of South Africans should not be what they aspire to be in. If anything, we need a smaller, devoted, productive, highly productive class of farmers in this country. And yes, if you want to play the race game, of course, get more young Black individuals in there. But really, the race is secondary to the fact that we need just young people, period, in our farming ecosystem in the first instance. But actually, really, for the vast majority of South Africans, pardon me, this notion that politicians push of, oh, we need to go back to the land is absolute bullshit. And excuse my language, but it frustrates me when I look at my predicament and the amount of money I have to spend in order just to get a farm up and running. This is not attainable for the vast majority of especially poor rural individuals. That actually we should be prioritizing a quality education that makes people competitive to enter into an urban space and become sort of, with skills, middle-class urban dwellers, and leaving farming, pardon me, to those of us who actually can make it work and make it work at a commercial level. Or am I being the Uncle Tom sellout here?
No, look, I don't think so. Look, I think this is an interesting topic, and as we've gone around, because I can relate to so much, I think because you could come into this topic from every possible angle, whether it's about union, whether it's labour, whether it's race relations, whether it's governmental, whether it's law and order, and we could probably have a whole subject, a whole discussion on any one of them. And look, I think you're absolutely right. I think that the statistics are there's going to be something like by the end of the decade, something around 20,000 commercial farms in South Africa, which is a tiny number of people, compared to the population. But there are also opportunities, and I think there are wasted opportunities. When I saw the agri census came out in the Western Cape, it showed that effectively 50% of farms in the Western Cape are lying fallow. So I saw somewhere else, but I've never been able to find the stats. But it's something like 70% of all farms in South Africa are on the market. Nobody wants to farm. Actually, most farms are certainly under the apartheid system, and in the past, then land was provided cheaply, and what was heavily subsidized at a guaranteed market. We're in a different environment, and farming is a highly specialized, highly skilled thing. And we definitely can bring other people into commercial farming, but that involves apprenticeships, and involves training, but it's not an easy thing to fix. But I think there are definite opportunities around agriculture. But I think what we're talking here, and I'm going to come back to something that's touched on there, and this maybe perhaps is a bit controversial, but I think probably it's something we've not touched in, so I'm going to touch on it. And I think there's an issue around law and order, around these issues, that goes also back to Marikana. And I think we made when I look at children, I say everything is a teaching moment. If I allow my child to do something, or I stop them from doing something, whichever action I take, I've taught them. I've either taught them it's okay to do that, or it's not okay to do that. And I think the vilification of the police at Marikana, and actually the lifting up of the minors and making them the innocent victims, actually has destroyed a section of law and order and disempowered the police in a way that we can never possibly imagine. And I look back at that, and obviously, do I think that the execution of minors was acceptable in Marikana? I absolutely don't. But what I say is when 10 people were murdered, you should have gone home. If I'm standing in a mob where the people around me have murdered 10 innocent people, I'm going to get out of there pretty quick. if I hang around for a week later, I'm no longer an innocent person. I am guilty by association if I've attached myself to that mob. And actually, Marikana was a mess because we had an untrained police force, we had a badly managed police force, and those issues are still there. But actually, what we've ended up in a situation where our police are now scared to act, and of course, there's a halfway house between that, and that's an issue that also has to be addressed. Yeah, we've got a police force that isn't really very functional, and therefore, when we get issues of law and order, then we don't handle them very, very well. And I get that that's a sensitive subject, and actually I think but I think in terms of was the policing of Marikana handled well? It was handled terribly, and there's no excusing that. But at the same time, the miners who murdered 10 innocent people are not the innocent victims of that either, and we need to deal with those issues and find ways. And I think we've created a situation where effectively we've disempowered our authorities.
Absolutely. And as we just conclude this section, guys, and it's open to anybody who wants to chime in here, we're also avoiding the elephant in the room here, insofar as this culture of violence, of things descending into violence, and quote unquote, effectively rendering something ungovernable. It has a genesis somewhere, and it has a genesis in our liberation politics in this country, which was bequeathed to us by the likes of our ANC, PAC, and the like, where if you don't get your way, forget a reform approach, which is always gradual, which requires negotiation, which requires a level-headedness and the recognition of the other's position. No. Instead, what we've bequeathed onto this nation on whatever issue, whether it's labor relations, a so-called service delivery protest, or general protest, is this idea that violence, destroying everything around you and quote unquote rendering things ungovernable, is actually a culture, a behavior that we picked up from the commie and socialist past of yesterday's liberation movements, and we have not shaken out, if you will, that toxic discourse from our politics, that toxic discourse from the approach in which things are done in this country. And unionism and workers in this country in particular are at the forefront of emulating that behavior, and that's what we're mainly seeing in Kirkwood. I mean, we saw it very much recently also a month ago in Clover, guys, where human life becomes cheap, if anything, nothing. If I, a so-called worker or the aggrieved, have something to prove or something I must attain. Anyone want to chime in on this one before we move on? And there was silence in the house.
Well, I mean, what's there to say? The morality of this issue is cut and dried. I mean, you can talk about how desperate people are all you want, but I mean, I don't think there are very many people who could honestly stand up in public and come and justify the homicides committed in the name of the workers' movement in this country. It's really disgusting, and it's really sad. It's a miserable state of affairs, and it's not going to go away until the tripartite alliance relinquishes its control over the economy.
Absolutely.
There's
Guys,
nothing else to say but that.
Let me move us on because we are really running out of time. And let me begin with a topic which I think everybody was waiting for here, or at least two people were waiting for in particular. Free the Cape. It held a march, a freedom march on Freedom Day. We just didn't get a chance to cover it as I'm hearing feedback on myself. I hope you guys can hear me clearly. I want to play a very quick clip of the protest that you guys held. And I must say the numbers seem to be growing, but I'm going to put that to you guys in a moment. You'll correct me if I'm wrong in that regard. Let me just ready this clip. It's very short, 20 seconds. This is what happened on Freedom Day on the streets of Cape Town. And of course, those visuals courtesy of, oh goodness, man, I didn't even take his name down. He'll apologize. I'll apologize, please, to him for that. But it is on social media. I'll link it in the description of the video after this. And I must just quickly say, fair use, please, on all videos that I've used today. A nice little image here that I'm going to put on as I go to you, Phil, first. Two things about this image that struck me. It almost instinctively gets rid of both criticisms of often leveled against the Free Cape movement broadly. It's often called a fringe movement. You'll hear people say, only what's Jack's party? I can't think of it for the life of me. The Cape Independence Party, if I'm not mistaken. Phil?
Yeah. That's right. Yes, it is.
Yeah. It's often said, oh, it's just that party. But here you have this image here. There's Cape Exit. There's Jack's party there. I see the flag in the background. I see the Freedom Front Plus here. So various organizations that are beginning to express their voice on this issue. And also, secondly, the other criticism we often hear is, oh no, they say it's only those racist whites who want to leave the country because they hate black people, they hate colored people, and the like. And here you have a photo, Phil, of a rather diverse crowd. What's going on here, Phil? The narrative seems to be crumbling.
And look, we've got some wonderful photos. We've got one, but the narrative was always false in the first place. So I think this march has been very powerful in terms of that. I think for anybody that was there, there was well over 1,000 people here. It came, and the organizer, if anyone who was there will just tell you how totally diverse, even more so than actually you saw in that picture for some reason. I would say that the march probably was about at least 50% of the people there were not white, and there was also a sizable number for the first time, which was different from the last march. Was a sizable number of black people at the march this time. And a really fantastic atmosphere. And imagine now, in contrast to our last subject, 1,000+ people marching 3.6 kilometres through the centre of Cape Town, past Parliament, provincial legislature, Long Street, no arrests, nothing burnt. We picked up our own litter. We prayed. We had speeches. We tidied everything up and we went home. And sadly, and that's the real tragedy. We really made think coverage, nothing. News 24, not a squeak. Daily Maverick, not a squeak. Times, one hit piece written before the thing, not a squeak. It effectively didn't happen. That is really unfortunate. And obviously we'll fight that, and the videos will get out, and obviously people will know it did happen. But it was a phenomenal day. It was very, very powerful. And it was for those that were there. It was a continuation of our last march. It was a really festive spirit, a celebration of Cape culture, but it was a real statement. And we handed over the petition with about 3,000. I think turned out to be 3,333 names, which was purely by chance, but quite a nice number. And it was you saw the scenes there at the start. It was a really boisterous, noisy crowd at the provincial legislature. So I think that the statement was received very well.
Absolutely. And I think there's a few comments here I want to raise here because, for as much as you guys say this, there's a lot of people who have a few reservations when it comes to this particular movement. Here's Delwyn, Swart saying, the problem with the secession movements is that they almost always end in violence or B, seldom succeed. Can we say Spain and most recently the Donbass? Another person here, Anneke Kruger, says, as a Cape Townian myself, I do not really agree with the independent Cape stance. We're part of South Africa and we need to join the rest of citizens in fighting for South Africa. And, even as I say this, Phil, I'll come back to you in a moment. Rob, sorry, I'm just keeping to these two because they're some of the loudest voices of this particular movement online. Rob, how do you deal with that last comment in particular? Some Cape Townians saying, no, actually, we're part of the country and, we need to make the country work and, maybe divorce ourselves from this notion of a free Cape.
I don't know. I mean, that's an awfully big rock to lift. I think, particularly for the Western Cape, who where the vast majority of people over here, and I'm assuming Anneke Kruger, would be unlikely to fall in with the majority opinion in the country on most political issues. I think, again, I mean, my argument that I made earlier was mainly based on one that there are sort of deeper aspects to political culture that people sort of tend to neglect, and I think that the majority of Black South Africans who are engaged in serious questions about, what the nation means, what the nation should be doing long term on a profound level. A lot of them, a lot of the thinkers have brought up the very, very key question of whether or not any of the Western institutions that we have inherited from colonialism ought to be preserved at all. And so I think that for those of us who still find the particular character of like some of the aspects of the Western rule of law to be worth preserving, I don't think it would be fair of us to try and fight to continue imposing it on everyone. And I think that that's a difficult struggle that's going to be have to be had. And I don't think that the people of the Western Cape, even those who are not of a sort of purely Western inclination politically, are interested in sharing exactly the same political model long term as the rest of the country is. And I don't think that forcing people to assimilate in a whole region which doesn't share as much cultural character as the rest of the country is a very good idea, and I don't think it's the right thing to do. But also, I mean, the issues that we've been describing now up till this point are extremely difficult and deep economic problems, and it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. There's a very deep dip coming. And for those of us in the Cape who wish to preserve what it is before we get dragged down with everyone else to the reset point, shall we say, I'd prefer to sort of preserve what we have and get out now. And I think the rest of the country, it feels awful saying this because, I mean, look, for me, it's been a couple of years since I've said my emotional goodbye to the rest of the country and sort of started feeling attached to the Cape as an idea and as a nation. And it was very hard for me. It was an extremely painful, heartbreaking experience. Letting go of the rest of that country is, I mean, it's not something you do easily. It's, especially if you're someone who really cared about it, and I really did for a very long time, and it was a very hard decision to make. So I don't see a way of saving South Africa in the next 10 to 15 years at all.
Well, Rob, let me come in
but I
there,
do,
very briefly. Sorry, Rob, I need to interject only because we've really run out of time. And I want to get a sense of the broader conversation here, which is perhaps the Western Cape is not the only part of the country which is having these murmurs. I think the Western Cape is the more organized of everybody else. Koketso, let me come to you, and Nzuzo, I'm going to come to you also in a moment. Because I look at a place like Ifoma Bob in particular. There are still people in that part of the world, the Northwest, who look at the state of that province now and go, but hang on, it was never always like this. In fact, if we look around us, there is infrastructure that still stands today, perhaps even stronger than what the ANC has built as this modern iteration of government. Infrastructure that's still standing today that is from those Baputitswana years. Yes, that government was a sham in its nature, but its principles of an independent region still live on to a lot of people in that part of the world. Koketso, or am I misreading that?
No, you're not misreading. You're spot on. In fact, even under the framework of apartheid, of course, Baputitswana still had some semblance of self-determination, which, it's effectively disappeared. And I think you can say the same for some of the other parts of the country as well. I mean, look, back in those days, again, I wasn't around at Baputitswana's height of existence, of course, but stories I hear from my parents, from family members, etc. When you told things like back then you couldn't you weren't allowed to put up a corrugated roof structure in Buputatswana. And that was the law. And the leadership spoke, the Bantustan leadership spoke, and they spoke once, and that was the law. You were not allowed to put up a corrugated roof structure to live in, that is. You could put up a long door toilet and cover it like that, that's fine, but that would not be your place of residence. It was a rule. Things like that, these little things, it disappeared with a lot of the Bantustans. But I agree with you in that the Cape is probably the best organized. And I've said this before, but again, my personal belief is that the Republic of South Africa is too big. We definitely need to, if failing federalization, of course, split the country up. It's too big. Let her people organize themselves into multiple countries, effectively balkanize the republic if need be, and create a cocktail of new countries that can have each having their own law. They can put in their they can put in their mechanisms in terms of how to govern. If they want a king and a prime minister, they can go ahead and do that. If they want a president and democratic elections every 4 or 5 years, they can do that. Can go with a 2-3 party state or 30 parties. It's really up to them, but give the people the option to actually do that, so they can have effectively a smaller landmass for them to call their own, and allow them to really move forward in terms of their culture, their heritage, and to participate on the global stage without the boot of ANC leadership, suffocating everyone, which is exactly what the Cape is trying to achieve. I fully understand where they're coming from. I still think it's a very ambitious goal, of course, and like I've said, perhaps in our lifetime we might just see it. But I'm in full support of, at the very least, the outcome, and I'd like the rest of the country to follow suit. If not, at the very least, to do exactly what I just imagined. But if not that, then at the very least to allow people to have, to basically allow independent nation states to have some form of self-determination, which I think is very critical. It's very important, and it's the only way we'll actually move forward, at least in this part of the world.
Man, them comments are becoming quite wild. Nzuzo, I'm going to come to you, and then Thanda. Yes, Nzuzo, as I listen to this conversation, for me, it's actually kind of interesting in the sense of, if you talk to the older generation, and I don't know if you've shared the same sentiment here, or pardon me, you've had the same experience, but if you talk to the older generation, they'll quickly tell you, hey, man, you know what? And often it shocks us as the younger black generation, if I can put it that way, where the older generation will quite openly and quite freely say something like, you know what, apartheid was a complete evil, it was a complete shit show. However, the one thing we never, sorry, I thought of the sentence in Zulu, I swear, the one thing we didn't suffer or we're not short of are things like the rule of law, law and order, jobs, and a sense of, or I've just said the rule of law, an ordered sense of things. And if we can have that again under this new dispensation of democracy, maybe as a more federal country or autonomous regions, some people say we'd rather head in that direction. I don't know, Nzuzo, if you've experienced that same notion. I don't know what part of the country you're from, but what's been your experience? And Thanda, as I segue the question to you, I want to bring it to KZN, because I think there's a 3-minute conversation we need to dwell on that for a moment when it comes to KZN. Those.
Yeah, certainly. I grew up I was born in KZN, but I grew up in Joburg, moved to Joburg. But nonetheless, many family members were living in Joburg, particularly Soweto, during apartheid. Well, I've had those conversations, and people said that firstly we had rail. You're able to travel from obviously town up until Kliptown until the Vaal as well with the train, and across the country we're able to use rail easily, and you don't have the situations which you find now. The rule of law was implemented, and also I think that ultimately down to the circumstances which people found themselves in, particularly black people, which is that a government that didn't really care about you, they didn't really care about how you organize a community. The community itself had to organize itself. And so, values were upheld, morals were upheld, And, people lived a certain way. It has disintegrated as a result of the ANC's introduction into government. ANC has now become the father to everyone else across the country, the savior, the liberators, whatever you want to call them, and they've destroyed the communities in which were quite strong communities across the border. And yeah, a lot of people obviously take a lot of people also see the apartheid system as the evil system that it was. Of course, it's if I'm not mistaken, it's a crime against humanity in terms of the UN charter. But nonetheless, there were certain policies which I wouldn't say make sense, but at the time, you'd understand as to, look back in history and you'll see that people made decisions because of the circumstances at that time, such as Bantustans. It's obvious that the country was too big, and there were many different cultures within it, and you had to separate it via those along those lines. And ultimately, it worked in some places, in other places it worked. I know in KZN, in Zululand, in some instances it worked. It worked really well. In other instances, you had obviously chiefs that were just dictators and would use violence against people who didn't necessarily adhere to their rules. But it has been like that since the dawn of time. You have cuck leaders, you have good leaders. It just happens. That's just the nature of leadership. That's just the nature of running a big, large community. So, and you saw it even with the Roman Empire. But nonetheless, you had everyone had their goal, and the goal was to improve their communities and ultimately depend on themselves. A lot of self-reliance was created within the black community as a result of the apartheid government not giving a damn about black people, and you obviously have to police yourself. It worked to a certain extent, and from a social point of view, from an economic point of view, jobs were easy to get. They were like sweets. People would be easy to get. For black people, it was easy to get jobs. Apparently, in the Transkei, there was essentially 0% unemployment rate. People would get jobs easily. My dad would tell me that he would leave a job this week. By next week, Monday, he has another job. That's heaven in my eyes. So ultimately, a lot of the old generation look back onto it and see heaven as compared to now. But ultimately, I'm the type of man to look forward, and I think that we can take lessons from both sides of the coin, which is apartheid and democracy. But nonetheless, it has to be down to as Rob said, the people have to decide. And if people want Cape independence, so be it. They want Cape independence, they want to determine their own way of life, then so be it. I think also a lot of people in South Africa don't realize that, this is my opinion, the constitution is the real enemy. To be honest, it's too rigid. It's too many requirements. The rights just don't make sense, especially in the black community. I don't know of a black community even understanding what the hell the right to environment is. I don't even know if they understand the right to administrative action. But nonetheless, it's just you can't implement such a thing on a community that essentially will use democracy to the extent of communicating rather than on paper. For them, it's okay, we get together, a elite of people, not necessarily elite, but an older class of people within the community decide all and everything that happens in the community. And everyone says, okay, cool. And ultimately, if people are not happy with that decision, people are able to voice their frustrations and, that council. And I see this a lot in KZN or in the old days. The council will be able to renege on its own decisions and go back to what people actually want. And it worked. It worked to a certain degree. And I think that that's necessary. It needs to be fluid. It can't be so rigid as to what the Constitution is. The Constitution is just too rigid. There's too many things that it requires. There's too many things that the government cannot do. You can't have a Constitution that essentially places the government in direct conflict, or rather, it places the government in a situation where it contributes the rights. Sorry.
Now, saying I don't know if I was finishing a sentence in the wrong direction there, but it seems as if you're saying one shouldn't have a constitution that almost places the government in a position where it will come into conflict with people,
Yeah.
diverse people, by trying to be a one-size-all type thing. I don't know if I took your point in another
Exactly.
direction
Yeah.
there. It was,
Exactly that. Yeah, you can't have you can't have a constitution which actually puts everyone in conflict with each other, and that's the issue. And ultimately, as we all know, Kodesa was essentially a oligarchy that decided what people would do, how people would live, and that's the situation, and that's the problem that we have with right now. You have an oligarchy that decided how we live and how we interact with each other, and that's the problem. Ultimately we needed to maintain the Bantu stance, but obviously don't call them Bantu stance. But we need to maintain and really just break up the country into a few more pieces so that we can actually have practical solutions to our problems. So yeah, that's what I.
and I want to come in here because Tanda, I'll come back to you, and then Phil, you can wrap up the segment for us, please, because I need to say this. You know, calling for Cape independence, calling for a free KZN, calling for an independent Northwest is not the same as apartheid. I think this has to be said, and it has to be said with a confidence and a clarity of voice. Because often when you start saying these sort of things, people go, "Oh, so you want apartheid to come back?" Actually, no. Apartheid was the exact opposite of what we're actually talking about here, in the sense that often these areas were not autonomous. They were not even given the freedom to self-determine. To a large extent, they were under the thumb of Pretoria, and it was a sham. And what we're saying, or at least what I'm saying, when it comes to my view on this particular issue, as I'm invested in KZN, KwaZulu-Natal, is that actually I'd love to see a KwaZulu-Natal become a much more initially, South Africa rather, become a much more federal country initially. And of those regions that then do want to break away, absolutely, they should have the freedom to do so. And that's a very controversial thing to say when people don't understand exactly what you're saying, and rather they view it through the lens of saying, "Oh, so you want a apartheid 2.0." Tanda, this is what I wanted to come to you, because you're obviously born here in KZN. I'm from here. We went to the same primary school. You know, you and I grew up in a time where it was very different in this province. Race relations were being fixed much quicker, arguably, before even they were legislated, so to speak, insofar as former white schools were opened up relatively quickly. In fact, there was a lot of white schools that were open to blacks even during apartheid back then. What I'm trying to denote here is Natal had always been rather different to the rest of the country. Yet you have a situation today where those of us who live in KwaZulu-Natal can't then self-govern in a culture that we've always seemingly had. This kind of thing is going to come into conflict eventually with Project South Africa.
Yeah, look, I think the difficulty with I believe in federalism. I like what you said when you say federalism or secessionism or breaking up the country is not bringing back apartheid, and it's not because actually before there was apartheid and before there was even colonialism, the country was broken up. There was a Zulu kingdom, and not even all Zulus were under one kingdom. So parts of them did not see themselves as part of the Zulu kingdom. The Xhosas have multiple kings, so we were like that. People grouped themselves according to their culture, the way that they think, and I think as a result of that, the kind of communities, the kind of states that were built were more harmonious. In a sense, internally harmonious, at least, and that's always the best you can hope for. As Koketso said, different people will have different views. If we were to break up South Africa again, you might find different people having different views. These ones want kings. These ones want, communism. These ones want capitalism. These ones want this and that, and you might find that type of thing happening. But the most important thing is that people need to be safe. People need to be, have a sense of belonging because I said that was one of the things that's an issue in South Africa currently, is the people who destroy infrastructure and destroy institutions or whatever don't feel a sense of belonging to this country. So that's really what you want to create by splitting things up. The difficulty, of course, that I see is how are you going to determine the borders, you know? So the Cape, for example, says we want an independent Cape. I have absolutely no idea how the Western Cape's borders were ever drawn up, what the criteria was for it or not. So I don't know whether if it breaks away, it's stealing a piece of somebody else's land or not. I have no idea. So that would obviously be a big argument. But in principle, I'm for it. I believe that it's not just about becoming big. You know, we always say it's quality over quantity. You need a quality society, a quality community, a quality cohesiveness, and a quality vision that everybody goes behind, and that's what can actually make it successful. China, okay, it's a repressive country, but it's kind of a successful country in a sense, because it rallies under one ideology and goes together on that ideology. Singapore has become, this great, symbol of success, and it was ruled by a dictator for 30 years. So it's not really. It's more about people having one idea and working towards it. There's probably many ways to kill a cat, but it's about having that one idea and going towards it together. And so that's why I believe that the cacophony of cultures that we are currently trying to put together, the rainbow nation we're trying to put together, I don't believe it's going to work within a relatively reasonable period of time. I think it would take maybe hundreds of years to work. And I think what might work quicker is breaking things up and allowing people to associate themselves according to core beliefs that they can rally behind, that they can actually work together.
Phil, final word is yours, 30 seconds, and we must wrap up the show.
No, perfect. Look, great to hear everybody's feedback. I think it starts with self-determination, and that's the key word here. And then from that, people can decide: do they want to be part of a federal South Africa? Do they want to cede? Do they want to? And then that allows people democratically within regions to decide what the appropriate way for them to be governed. And I think we just have to reimagine the whole thing. Yeah, and people talk about federal. Is that a federal South Africa? Is that a confederal SADC where actually all of these countries come together and you have these different independent countries who now form much like the European Union, but sovereignty resides at a provincial or territorial level. And I think it's just a valuable discussion to have. I mean, obviously we want independence, and that's a topic that's understood by most, and it's based on the democratic will of the people. But absolutely, it's something that that right is a right that everybody must have. And I think that's a discussion now that's becoming more and more important, we welcome the broader discussion, and I think Cape Independence plays a central role in that. And actually, it's been a great facilitator of a discussion that's allowed us to talk about other things around that. So I definitely think and hope that Cape Independence will also bring freedom to other parts of South Africa and allow people to be governed the way they want to be governed.
Well, there you have it, guys. I must end the conversation here. As you can see, two of our fellow panelists have fallen off. They did ask to be excused, and I did mention that at the beginning of the show. Major thanks to the Friends panel. As always, we always end it off by giving everybody an opportunity to plug their show. Koketso, ManPatria show tomorrow, 7 p.m. Are you guys recording or is there a show? And what's happening next week?
So we do respect public holidays. So we'll do it on Tuesday instead of Monday. Before, we get accused of many things, one of which is that we are funded by corporate shows, etc. So given that we've been accused of that, let's pander to the corporate calendar and also observe public holidays. But otherwise catch us 7 p.m. usually on Mondays, live stream. If on a public holiday Monday, then you can catch us out on Tuesday, and come hang out with us. Just a bunch of good-looking black guys talking current affairs and giving our own conservative/libertarian take on things.
Hey man, I know that feeling. Apparently, I'm funded by Russia, So who knows? I'll be playing golf and having vodka with Oprah Putin very soon. That's of course Koketso Resane from the ManPatria show. Tanda, how do the folks find you on social media if you want to be found? Tanda, are you still with us?
Yes, I am. On Twitter, at TandaM2. That is my Twitter handle. And yeah, that's just me, and all my thoughts are there.
Excellent. So that is, of course, Tanda Mabaso out in Pretoria. He's an independent business analyst, or just, I should say, a business analyst, period. And great insights from him as always. Phil Craig, how do the folks find you?
Yeah, our website, capeindependence.org, or social media platforms are all under Let's Free the Cape. But capeindependence.org is the best one, and then you'll find everything from there on.
Absolutely. And of course, Zupra Phil Craig from the Cape Independence Advocacy Group. As I say goodbye and thank you to all of them, I say that to you too, dear viewer. Thank you for watching, having been a viewer on this one. It was a bit longer than usual, but we always allow for that extra 30 minutes. This is, as I said, the one and only long format show that I've had on the Big Daddy Liberty Show. I hope you enjoy it as we look to refresh the channel a little bit. It's been a very rough 3 weeks here in Durban with the flooding and the amount of damage we've had to endure both on the farm and here. So we might be moving into a more secure location, at least a more flood-proof location. But until all of that, thank you so much for watching. And if you want to support the show, please have a look at the descriptor of the video. A lot of you are doing a simple 100 Rand a month, and it's going a very long way in allowing me to do have a bit of flexibility to do the things that I need to do, including hiring some space where we can set up our studio. So many thanks to you who contribute to the show already. With that being said, thank you for watching, and remember, as I always say at the end of every show, and that is for you to never trust a commie.